Christianity and Gun Control, Take 12. They that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Matthew 26 and 52. These famous words were spoken by Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane when Simon Peter drew his sword and cut off the ear of Malchus, the servant of the high priest, on the night of his betrayal by Judas Iscariot. For many Christians, this directive is an irrefutable command that prohibits firearms, and it directly comes from the Lord himself. Yet for many others of like faith, this is an inconclusive statement because it refers to an impulsive act of prevention to keep Christ from being arrested. Something that Christ was already willing to do, knowing it would lead him to his destiny of the cross to die for the sins of the world. In other words, this view suggests it was the action taken, not the weapon itself, which Christ reprimanded. Amidst a theological study of faith and firearms, we must also consider our specific societal and governmental structure and what bearing they have upon the Christian. The gun control issue is heating up, and the more recent events in Connecticut and numerous shootings on college campuses has raised serious concern among Americans as to what degree we should protect our right to bear arms. It is not that these events are remote to our country, but rather the frequency by which these episodes have occurred. Liberties that are at the cornerstone of our Constitution are being questioned. Stricter gun laws are being formed and passed through. As Christians, we are called fellow citizens of the household of God. Yet we also are called to be subject to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether to the king as supreme or unto governors, as sent by him for vengeance on evildoers and for praise to them that do well. Ephesians 2:19, 1 Peter 2:13 and 14. It would appear, according to Scripture, that we have a moral and civil responsibility to our country that stems from our spiritual commitment. Where then can a Christian stand on this issue? How does a Christian's belief in turning the other cheek and love your neighbor as yourself gel with the right to defend himself? What facts do we have to justify faith and firearms? Why were Americans given the right to bear arms to begin with? Let's start there. A bumper sticker read, "An armed man is a citizen, a disarmed man is a subject." Strong words, but maybe not too far from what was intended when the Second Amendment was penned. The Second Amendment reads, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." Earliest indications of the intent of the Second Amendment by our founding fathers seem to see civilians who are armed as a militia fighting force in the event that their basic liberties as a nation are under duress. A different mentality to be sure, but in my opinion, a timeless admonition of liberty. As a description of this amendment is explained by the Free Dictionary, it reads, "Some states asserted that bearing arms was a right of the people, whereas others called it a duty of every able-bodied man in the defense of society." A lot of pro-gun control activists would shudder at that statement. The intent for the availability of firearms to citizens had a specific purpose. Thomas Jefferson articulated an even clearer position. No free man shall ever be debarred the use of firearms. The strongest reason for the people to retain the right to keep and bear arms is as a last resort to protect themselves against tyranny in government. Personal protection against an oppressive, tyrannical government was in the foremind of America's founders. A problem then presents itself for those who advocate stricter or stringent gun laws. How does one avoid cutting off the nose to spite the face? If the Second Amendment was established to protect its citizens, how do you propose opposing gun enthusiasts who are abiding by the laws of the land? Where the Christian is concerned, in an article called Christians and Guns, Carlos Stagnaro writes, quote, "As Larry Pratt of Gun Owners of America notes, while Christ told Peter to put your sword in its place, he clearly did not say get rid of it forever. That would have contradicted what he had told the disciples only hours before. Peter's sword was to protect his own mortal life from danger. His sword was not needed to protect the creator of the universe and the King of Kings," unquote. The passage referred to is when Jesus told his disciples, among other things, "If you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one." Luke 22:36. As Christ followers, we aim to serve our communities to the best of our ability. Gun control may seem like a worthy crusade in an effort to curb the evils of society. Violence is automatically associated with firearms. Some think that to own a firearm implies a shoot first, ask questions later approach. However, according to a website called Just Facts, 67% of people purchase guns to protect themselves against crime, 66% for target practice, and 58% for hunting. Still, admittedly, violent gun crimes are prevalent in society. But as Stagnaro observes, the problem is not six-shooters, the problem is sinners. Eliminating guns won't solve that problem. The ultimate solution to gun-related violence is the transformation of individuals by the gospel of Jesus Christ, wrote Adam Sandlin in The Christian Statesman. Case in point, Chicago currently has the strictest gun laws in the states, yet suffers from more crimes committed by unpermitted guns, numbering more than 4,000 higher than New York, according to the New York Times. Taking guns away isn't fixing crime. In fact, gun ownership may serve as just a deterrent needed for law-abiding citizens. Quote, the gun laws in Chicago only restrict the law-abiding citizens, and they've essentially made the citizens prey, unquote, said Richard A. Pierce, executive director of the Illinois State Rifle Association. Langston makes a good comment to consider as well. We have chosen to focus on gun control instead of crime control or thug control. Only recently has the public become complacent enough to accept by inaction the violence present in our society. Countries who have sought to eliminate guns altogether are England, Australia, Canada, and Japan. Their results, however, have been far from impressive. For example, according to the BBC News, handgun crime in the United Kingdom rose by 40% in the 2 years after it passed its draconian gun ban in 1997. And since Australia's 1996 laws banning most guns and making it a crime to use a gun defensively, armed robberies rose by 51%, unarmed robberies by 37%, assaults by 24%, and kidnappings by 43%. While murders fell by 3%, manslaughter rose by 16%. Most certainly not the results expected. So am I suggesting that Christians should just give up prayer meetings for the shooting range? Hardly. In fact, one of the greatest assets to a secular society that the Christian provides is a sense of moral responsibility in the midst of declining moral values. Rachel Alexander from Policy Mic wrote, there is a direct correlation between the increase in violence and the gradual degradation of morals, ethics, and parenting. We are cultivating mental illness in our society. Rachel Alexander is proposing that the failure is not at the gun counter, the background check, or the waiting period before picking up a firearm. It's people. Broken, misguided, sick people. Carlos Stagnaro adds, it is people who are good or evil, not guns. Of course, those who deny this implicitly affirm that guns are magical things with the power to change people's minds. That is obviously an absurdity. Perhaps then the focus on gun control should turn to self-control and the positive impact a life can make when it is driven by a greater purpose found in Christ. I find it fascinating that as a nation, gun control has become a hot topic, but what about alcohol control or cell phone control? According to the Highway Traffic Administration, driving a vehicle while texting is 6 times more dangerous than driving while intoxicated. We do have laws that govern use of these things, but it is curious how this issue of gun control has reached a heightened focus, almost obscuring the aforementioned. A loaded gun aimed at someone is frightening. A drunk driver behind the wheel of a 10 to 15,000 pound vehicle speeding down the road, in some ways more so. Kevin Langston wrote, it is only in the last 20 years that people have begun shouting gun control. As believers, we have a responsibility to comprehend the basis for the use of firearms if we are to exercise any course of action beyond a passive view. Ed Kelleher, in his article on Christians and Firearms, makes some noteworthy points about the nature of biblical responsibility given to the Christian. One point of consideration is that we should protect the lives God has given us because they're His lives, not ours. In essence, a stewardship. He takes the reasoning a little bit further by asserting that evil might try to take our physical life before we've completed God's purpose for us. Someone might try to harm us or our family. Of course, this reasoning is not arbitrary, but based on the scriptures that teach there is real evil in the world, not confined to the unseen realm, that in fact evil manifests itself in the physical. I'm reminded of the words of the Apostle Paul, for the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but mighty before God, to the casting down of strongholds, 2 Corinthians 10:4. Paul was reminding us that we do not preach the gospel under the coercion of bullets. On the other hand, the same apostle wrote in 1 Corinthians 13 that love always protects. That's in verse 7 of the same chapter. Kelleher also postulates this question, is there something we should protect at the risk of our lives? He answers his own question by pointing out that husbands are called upon to love their wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it, Ephesians 5:25. Finally, Kelleher, in one of his strongest points, talks about the soldiers in Luke 3:14, who were converted and asked John the Baptist what to do next. He didn't tell them to quit, but to be content with their wages. But the soldiers were told to do no violence. The Greek word for violence in the original text is diasio, It means to shake strongly, to cause to fear, to intimidate. In other words, don't unrighteously cause the honest men to fear. Only the criminals and enemy you are sent against. Kelleher was not speaking of vigilante justice, but in the case of ordinary Christians, self-defense. There have been many horrific crimes committed with guns. The pain of those who have lost those precious to them have good reason to be outraged. Unfortunately, that outrage can become aimed at the weapons that preserve peace for so many others. Gun removal has not had the effect that some thought it would in other countries. The Second Amendment has intended to protect our liberty as free people in the event of tyranny. Morality is a lot larger issue in gun control than many are willing to admit. I do not currently own a firearm, but recent developments surrounding gun control have strengthened my resolve to become a gun owner. One radical gun control proponent beamed, "This year will go down in history. For the first time, a civilized nation has full gun registration. Our streets will be safer, our police more efficient, and the world will follow our lead into the future." Adolf Hitler. A sobering thought to consider. Thank you for your time.